Astrology Night here at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. It is the last Wednesday of the month of April 2017, and we're here tonight to talk about the astrology of May for 2017. And I think it's a little bit gentler than some of the astrology has been. Things will heat back up again in June and July. But overall, I think May is a bit of a breather. Doesn't mean nothing will happen. It just means that we have a little bit more time to integrate stuff. And we'll get to all that in just a moment. I wanted to just touch base on just a couple of things. As many of you know, or some of you know, next week I will be heading down to Costa Rica and participating in a week-long astrology conference on the beach there with Kai Pacha and Maurice Fernandez and a bunch of other awesome, Patricia Walsh, a bunch of other awesome astrologers. And it's probably too late for you to register, so I'm just mentioning it so that you can eat your hearts out. A couple of weeks after that, well, actually Memorial Day weekend, the last weekend of May, NORWAC, the Northwest Astrology Conference, here in Seattle. Actually, it's down at the Doubletree Hotel down at SeaTac at the airport. Brings in astrologers from all around, all over the world. I will be there. It will be my 28th. That's like a Saturn return. It'll be the first NORWAC I went to was in 1989. No, it was in 1990. So this will be my 27th NORWAC. I've spoken at about 24 of them. This is a year off for me, but I will be there anyhow. It's an amazing event. It's not only a fun event, but the level of astrology, the quality of astrology there is really good. You can find out more online at norwac.net. That's NORWAC for the Northwest Astrology Conference, norwac.net. You can go for the entire weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If you can only fit in one day, there are single-day registrations, and there are pre-conferences and post-conferences on Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, and then on Memorial Day itself on Monday. It's a fantastic event, and if you're in the area, I encourage you to go. There will be speakers there this year, from all over the world. I mean, people come in from England, from France, from Norway. This year we have Brian Clark from Australia. It's a fantastic weekend. That's the Memorial Day weekend, last weekend in May. Then I will be up in Vancouver, British Columbia, not Vancouver, Washington, the weekend of June 8th through the 10th. And I'll be doing a lecture on Thursday night, June 8th. And this is sponsored by the Vancouver Fraser Valley Astrological Guild. And you can find out more information online. And if you're up there in Vancouver, I will be floating around from Friday. I'll be doing an all-day workshop on Saturday called 12 Practical Steps to Doing Better Chart Readings. The Thursday night lecture is everything you ever wanted to know about Uranus, but were afraid to ask. A repeat of that same lecture that I'll be doing in Costa Rica the week after next. And then the last thing I want to mention is that on July 31st, August 1st, 2nd, I will be doing a retreat workshop at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. Many of you know that I've been doing the first weekend in January there for years, about a dozen years now. And starting last year, I began doing a summer workshop also. It's a great place to be midsummer. This will be a mini version of the retreat that I led in India, which was an initiation to understanding the spiritual dimensions of astrology. And there's more information at Brighton Bush, that's Breiten, brightonbush.com, and that will sell out. So there's still plenty of room now, but if you're thinking about going, get a registration in. If you've never been to Brighton Bush, it's a magical place. Even if you don't come up for that weekend, get your butt up there. It's about an hour outside of Salem, Oregon, up in the old-growth forest of the Cascades, which is about an hour south of Portland, which is, if you drive fast, just an hour south of Seattle. Kidding. And that takes us up through the summer. That's as far as we need to go right now. I want to jump into the material for the month ahead. You know, each month I feel a little bit like a broken record up here because each month since somewhere around last August or September, I've opened this talk with the following statement. If you think things have been weird, well, you ain't seen nothing yet. And like a good astrologer, each one of my predictions has come true. It just keeps getting stranger and stranger and stranger until perhaps the worst thing that has happened is that the absolute strange and bizarre has become normalized. And we do need to keep our antenna up and fight against that. But I'm not sure that May will be weirder than it's been. It'll be as weird. But I really look at May, and it's a bit of a breather astrologically. There are some important things happening, and we'll get to them. But they're not on the same level of intensity as some of the things that have happened recently. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but oftentimes we're working really hard, and on Monday and Tuesday we don't really feel well, but we don't have time to get sick. So we just power into work on Wednesday, and we're not feeling great, but we power in again on Thursday. We do all the things that we needed to do Thursday night. We're running around in circles. We're keeping everything together. And then we're finally looking forward to the weekend where we can just catch up and relax, and we wake up Saturday morning and we're sicker than shit. What happens is that often we need time to assimilate the big things that happen. Even though we're there, we're experiencing it, we often can't assimilate it and incorporate it until we have a little bit of a breathing time, which is sometimes why we don't get sick until we finally have a day when we can rest. And then, of course, we can't rest. We're dealing with getting our immune system and feeling better again. Well, I think May is a little bit like that. It's not quite that severe, but normally when I look at a month, the first thing I look at is what are the outer planet transits? What's going on with Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto? What of those planets are making hard aspects or changing signs? And then I look at things like the new moon and full moon and eclipses if there are any. And of course we look at retrogrades, and this gives me a flavor of the intensity level. Not whether it's good or bad, just the sheer intensity of the energy that we'll be processing that month. And we're coming out of a period of time where we've had what I've called the retrograde relay race, where we've had the Venus retrograde that then turned direct on April 15th, but just a week prior to that, Mercury turned retrograde. So it's almost like Venus running along, hands off to Mercury, and now Mercury is still retrograde. And I say still, we're recording this on April 26th. But we're really looking at the astrology of May, and May begins with Mercury turning direct on May 2nd, and therefore we have the inner planets all going direct through the month of May, which certainly pushes us into new territory, lightens the load, and allows us to feel like we're moving forward again. Now again, outer planets also go retrograde, and we still have them kicking around, but I don't think they carry the same personal weight that the inner planets do when they're retrograde. So I guess I would be remiss in my job if I didn't start off by mentioning the fact that here on April 26th, we are just coming off of a wonderful new moon in Taurus. That was this morning here on the west coast of the United States. It was about 5 a.m. On April 26th. And this was actually a sweet new moon. And we look at new moons to kind of give us a flavor of what the energy will be in the weeks ahead. And I think that this is the first lunation that we've had in a while where when I look at it, I go, yum. Well, yum because it's a grounded, practical, sensible, sensual, beautiful, simplistic, nice and easy Taurus, Venus-related sign, new moon. And this is nice. But on top of that, we had this new moon that was in mid-Taurus, harmonizing with Pluto in mid-Capricorn, really grounding the energy. And then we have one other thing cooking here, and we will talk about this a little bit. It really fades through May, but it's present still at the beginning of May. And that is Mercury, which is retrograded right back up against Uranus. And I just want to talk about that for a moment, but I want to throw 3 dates out here first, assuming that I have them, seeing as how my printouts are totally screwed up. Okay, so Mercury turned, I don't have the exact dates. Mercury turned retrograde on April 9th. Actually, let's go back and do this real quickly. We're looking here at Mercury, and Mercury moved into Taurus. It turned retrograde, backed into Aries, and way back at the end of March, let's go back here. There we go. Okay, so here back around March 24th, Mercury was at 20 degrees, 21, 22, 23 degrees of Aries. And you can see how during that period of time, Mercury lined up with Uranus. Now, normally when the inner planets line up with an outer planet, they do that for a day, few hours, once a year. But when they go retrograde, they take that energy and hold it. And we're going to be talking about 2 of these patterns, one with Mercury and one with Venus, because they've both been either just retrograde or still retrograde. But we want to start off and look at Mercury, which on March 25th lined up with Uranus in Aries. And then it moved forward, and Mercury turned retrograde on April 8th, 9th in Taurus. And then it moved back. We're just watching Mercury right here, Mercury. And Mercury backed up into Aries. And then it backed up. Here we are back on April 26th. That would be today. And you can see that Mercury actually is moving slowly because it's getting ready to change direction again. But Mercury actually lines up with Uranus the second time, which it's doing right now. And it holds that because it turns direct on May 2nd. And then it takes a day or two for it to gain any real motion. And so Mercury lines up with Uranus for the third and final time on May 9th. Let me make sure I got on May 9th, yes. So, we're in the midst of this Mercury-Uranus conjunction, which on other years would last a few hours, or maybe even a day or 2 or 3. But now we have something that began a month and a half ago and is sticking with us. And what does this mean? Mercury is the planet of communication, interaction. Mercury, the same etymological root as mercantile. There's trade, there's back and forth, there's give and take. It's been said that, communication is a two-way street. You can't say, I lectured for an hour, it was a great conversation. No, that's just half of a conversation. Conversations begin when you listen. So, Mercury lining up with Uranus. Uranus is the weird planet. Uranus is the other than normal planet. Uranus is eccentric, it's erratic, it's futuristic. Uranus, I always equate it to lightning striking that releases tension, releases pent-up tension. And here what we have is this Mercury-Uranus conjunction in Aries that's been in effect over the last few days and will be in effect all the way through the beginning of May. When I say the beginning of May, it'll be in effect all the way through May 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th is when it will pick back up again, 9th and 10th, and then it will begin to fade. What does this mean? It means that, if you thought it was strange, it's going to get stranger. Now, I said that I wouldn't say that about this month, but here I am again. The thing is that information, that's Mercury, data, comes out into the open like lightning striking. You see, the thing about lightning is that it doesn't matter how dark it is outside, when the lightning strikes for that moment, for that 1 millisecond, you can see everything. You can see the hills in the background. You can see the rusted out car across the street. You can see the bike in the driveway. You can see everything. And you look out your window, and then a second later it's dark again. But you know what? You've seen it. You know what's there. This is the way Uranus works. And I think that part of what's been happening, part of what will continue to happen, and this is part of a deeper, longer cycle, because not only do we have the Mercury thing that we're dealing with right now, but we also have Venus coming in behind it that's going to line up with Uranus also. And what this does is this brings information, data, Mercury, or information about money, think tax returns perhaps, or something of that sort, out into the open. Do you understand what I'm saying here? Is that we are in a phase right now where it's almost impossible to be surprised at whatever crazy next thing we hear that's been disclosed on the news. Why? Because we've moved beyond two things. One, news. And I think there's a deeper discussion here that may not be fully appropriate to have right now, but I really think that we've gone through some sort of gate. I think I'll return to this a little bit later, but we've gone through some sort of gate where this whole concept of fake news, which is really a Neptunian issue, really is a cultural, social issue right now. It's not about whether you think this news is real or this news is not. We've lost control of a singular centrist perspective. Now, if you go back 100 years or so, anyone in the Western world who had an education learned the same thing. Might have learned it at different schools, but pretty much there was a party line and everyone, that's what education was. You learned it. Now, we've graduated away from that, and it's good news and bad news. The fact is that we do not have a singular perspective of objective reality. And so, you can't listen to commentators or read an opinion piece or read an article without coming across someone talking about this whole idea that we've lost the ability to know what is truth. Anyone who tells you that they know what's going on, run like hell. Because I don't care how smart they are or how good they are or how much they agree with you. The more you think you know what's true, the less true it probably is. And like I said, we can leave that, but we're going to touch a little bit on the deeper planetary rhythm as to why some of this may be coming to the surface now. However, coming back to May, we have Mercury lining up with Uranus, which is shooting lightning bolts of information and going, I see that fact, I get that, I'm connecting the dots, the lights are going on. Now, unfortunately, we are so overwhelmed with this kind of new information that we just go, yeah, You know, it's been said that things that are in the news, political things in particular, that have hit the news in the past couple of months on other years, at other times, would have stopped the government in its tracks. You know, and now it's like, I think it was Trevor Noah, who has this little routine he's been doing, this goes, ain't got no time for that. You know, it's like whatever the next amazing point of reference that gets changed, that gets blown apart, by the time we get to the end of the sentence of hearing it, there's something else that's even crazier. So, part of this is the Mercury conjunct Uranus, and it ain't over. And in fact, I think that the middle of, by the end of the first week of May, the beginning of the second week of May, when Venus is conjunct Uranus for the third and final time, we can create a little bit of a trajectory, perhaps, around some of the main events of what came into awareness back in March, and then again over the last week or so now, or around the middle end of April, and then aim toward the beginning of May. And that's the first point about this retrograde, because Mercury, during this retrograde, is actually lining up with Uranus. And incidentally, Mercury not only lines up with Uranus and then begins to go direct, but on May 16th, on May 15th, Mercury moves from Aries, out of Aries, back into Taurus. And I think that this will help us begin to ground the energy, to stabilize some of the craziness of what it is that we've learned. Now, I said there were two retrograde aspects that I wanted to talk about that would normally just be a day or two, that are this time stretched over a longer period of time. The first was this little Mercury-Uranus dance, which is really important on through the first part of May. The second one I want to talk about is Venus. And let's run this back to... Oh, we got to go back a ways for this. Just take a moment. I suppose I could have sped this up. Could have speeded this up. Whatever. Could have sped. I need a grammarian. Okay, here we go. So, stop. All right. So back toward the beginning of the year, when Venus was moving through Pisces, toward the end of January, Venus lined up with Chiron. Mars was there also, but Mars is moving out of the way. And what happened was that Venus, lining up with Chiron, then made a square to Saturn in Sagittarius. Can you see that? That would have been exact around January 27th. Venus in Pisces squaring Saturn. Again, this is an aspect that would normally happen for a day or two or three. And we might experience it as a bit of either loneliness or a feeling like we need to put up boundaries. You see, Venus is warm and yummy and sweet, and Saturn is cold and calculating. Venus wants her gratification now, and Saturn says, no, let's cool it and make it last and wait, and wait for it. And often Venus and Saturn are a hard energy to work together, because Venus doesn't like the cooling energy. Venus is the young daughter in love for the first time. It's romance, and Saturn's dad. No. So we got this first phase of this the end of January. Now, Mars was in the picture then also, even amping up that energy a bit more. But let's just follow the Venus piece of this. And Venus then moved into Aries on February 3rd. And then Venus turned retrograde right around there, around March 4th or 5th. I don't have the exact date, but it was right in there. And Venus in mid-Aries turns retrograde, and Venus backs up through March until by April 2nd, Venus backed out of Aries back into Pisces. Venus doesn't like being in Aries as much as she likes being in Pisces. Why? Because Aries is Marsy, it's hot, it's fiery. Venus is sweet and yummy and sensual. Now, the two of them can work well together, but Venus can't sustain her energy in Aries, where the energy is much more immediate. So Venus in Pisces, though, is yummy. The astrological term is Venus is exalted in Pisces. She likes being there because she gets to what's the word I'm looking for? Soak in the love, the compassion, the sensitivity, the dreams, the fantasies. But the problem is that when Venus in early April backed into Pisces, boom, she backed into that same square with Dad, with cold, naysaying, you can't go there, you have to wait, this isn't going to work, love isn't there, or love is there, but it's not the way you wanted it, therefore you have to go away, he has to go away, whatever it is, there's some kind of pulling back, often with Venus-Saturn connections. The question becomes, is it worth it? Now, the answer may be yes, but the question is this really worth it? Because the two of those energies have a lot that they need to work out. So Venus, even though it's not exact yet, continues to back up, but they're in the same, I don't want to say they're in the same sign, they're in signs that are square to each other. So when Venus backed into Pisces, even though it's still a couple of degrees away from being at 27 degrees exactly square to Saturn, we're already feeling it through the first part of April. And we follow that Venus back until around April 8th, 9th, she makes the second exact square to Saturn. And so now we see this pattern being established of isolation, of fear of loss of boundary, of is it worth it? And Venus continues to move retrograde until the 15th, when she turns direct. This is the 15th of April, but she's still within a degree of being exactly square to Saturn. So it's hard to get over this feeling that something isn't right. Are you with me here? Venus turns direct on the 15th, yay, and then she starts moving forward, but by the 20th, 21st, she is again square to Saturn. And even though now, the end of April, beginning of May, even though she's past the exact degree of being square to Saturn, she's still in the same sign that's square to Saturn. So this is the reason why we're talking about this, because when Venus moves from Pisces back into Aries on the 28th, that will be the freeing up of the energy, which means that we move into May with a sense of this when it comes to love and money. Got it? There's like a bit of relief, because normally this Venus-Saturn square would only be with us a day or two over an entire period of a year. And so that it's been lingering for what seems like months. We're going to notice it as it begins to pass. Now, the fact of the matter is that that's happening now, this week. But we also have Mercury lining up with Uranus, and that Mercury-Uranus is really sparking all over. So we kick the month of May off with a couple of very important things. And I sometimes teach professional astrologers, when they're seeing clients, sometimes the most important thing that's happening to a client right now, or the most important thing that's happening to a client in the month ahead, is actually something that happened last week or last month or last year. I know it's kind of a screwy way to think of it. But I'm suggesting, and the reason why we hung out on these pieces, is that this stuff is all absolutely significant for setting up the month of May. Because there's relief with Venus. Venus, yes, is back in Aries, and Venus stays in Aries for the entire month of May and doesn't move into Taurus, where she really likes being in Taurus because that's her home sign. She moves into Taurus on June 6th. But Venus actually it stays in Aries for the entire month. Mercury, on the other hand, as we just talked about, Mercury is out of Aries and on into Taurus by the middle of May. So we have this shift of interplanetary energies that's very significant. A couple of other things that I want to talk about, then we'll look at the new moon and full moon. There's one aspect that is sitting with us through this month that's exact. Let me just find the date. Okay, so we have Jupiter trine Neptune on May 25th. And there's one other piece of this. Jupiter, there it is. Jupiter trine Uranus on May 18th. All right, so let's look at these two pieces because we have Jupiter in Libra right now. Jupiter, let me get these again. Oh, okay, it's Saturn trine. Okay, here we go. Saturn in late Sagittarius forms a trine to Uranus in late Aries. Now, we've been under Uranian siege for probably 5 years, 6 years or so. In fact, ever since Uranus moved into Aries in 2010, we've been feeling its square to Pluto, which is all of this cultural, political, social change that I've babbled about from this stage way too often over the past 5 or 6 or 7 years. Uranus is getting relief, finally, from, of all people, Saturn. Now, Uranus and Saturn are very different. Saturn is the limit. Saturn is the boundary. Saturn is the wall. Saturn is the you can't go any further than this. It's the rule, it's the law, it's the limit, it's what is. Uranus, the lightning, comes along and goes, what wall? So Uranus's job is to instantaneously destroy the boundaries of Saturn. So these two planets are very, very different in the way that they work because, in a way, when Uranus and Saturn meet usually, it's usually an irresistible, irrepressible. I knew there was an error in there. Uranus is an irrepressible force. It's like it's like a pimple that's going to happen. You can't stop it. It gets to it. It's like an atomic reaction. Once it starts, you can't stop it halfway. It's like, I'm not going there, but you can. You get to a certain point, and it's a point of no return. That's Uranus. It's an irrepressible following through on some sort of action. Are you with me? Saturn, on the other hand, is an immovable wall. So typically, Uranus and Saturn have a hard time with each other because one of them doesn't stop for anything and the other thing stops everything. However, on May 18th, Saturn in Sagittarius forms an exact trine with Uranus in Aries. Now, this is slow-moving planets often move in and out of an aspect over the course of a period of time, and this one is no exception. In fact, Saturn trined Uranus on Christmas Eve. of 2016. Saturn trines Uranus for the second time on May 18th. On May 18th of 2017. And then Saturn turns retrograde, backs all the way up, moves direct again, and it trines Uranus for the third and final time on November 11th. So we will be talking about this again come October, November of this year. What does this mean? This means that there is a delicate dance, a harmonious balance between plowing into new territory and respecting tradition. Now, it may not seem like that's what's happening out there right now, but the fact of the matter is that we're not going as crazily into Uranian explode all the boundaries, nuke all the resistance, change everything. You see, Uranus turns everything upside down and inside out and backwards, and Saturn goes, whoa, not so fast. And so I think this aspect, this Saturn trine Uranus, which we will see as a background note all through 2017, all the way through the end of the year, but in particular through this middle of May. Right now, we will see this as a little bit of a governor on he who governs. Does that make sense? Cryptic enough? The point is that when Saturn and Uranus work well together, there's a bit of a make it real Saturn that doesn't just involve kind of turning things inside out and upside down and backwards. And all I can say is that without this Saturn-Uranus, can you imagine where we might be? I think that in the news today, and we will see what happens over the days and weeks ahead, now you got to remember, and although I certainly have a political bias, what I'm going to say here is not about any political bias. It's simply that Donald Trump is a major Uranian being. He was born during an eclipse, literally during an eclipse, within an hour of an eclipse, with his sun lined up with the planet Uranus, the planet of lightning, sudden change, topsy-turvy, crazy, futuristic, upside down, backwards, genius, hot, cold. I mean, this is, Uranus is outside of the rules. It's outside of Saturn. And so right now, with Saturn harmonizing with Uranus, we may actually see through the month of May a little bit of leaning on and or restraint. And I understand just in the news today that after making several declarations about shutting down the government this week, that Trump has backed down from a couple of the things that he said earlier in the week were non-negotiable. And I'm not saying this is good or bad, although I know which it is from my perspective. What I am saying, though, this is how Saturn works with Uranus. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm saying very specifically, this is how Saturn works with Uranus. And this becomes a theme all through the month. So one of the things we're looking at through the month is this Saturn harmonized or trining with Uranus. The other thing that I wanted to mention was, where did it go? Was the Jupiter trine Neptune. Now, Jupiter trine Neptune is exact more toward the end of the month. Jupiter. Oh, no, I take that back. That's Saturn trine. That's, again, I'm not working off my regular sheets. And so I'm looking here and I go, oh, that's middle of May, but that's the middle of May next year. So cool it, Rick. There was one other outer planet transit, though, that I wanted to talk about. That's what it was. It was the Jupiter Neptune. It's not on the sheet. It is Jupiter Neptune, but it's Jupiter Quincunx Neptune. All right, so let's back this up a little bit. This Jupiter Quincunx Neptune was exact for the first time in October of 2016. It was exact for the second time, or will be on May 17th, right around the same time as the Saturn trine Uranus we just talked about, and the third and final time will be in July. So let's back this up to the 17th, and here we can see this fat old green line connecting Jupiter to Neptune, and this is coming full cycle to what I said I would talk about earlier. This is, in part at least, the idea of fake news. What do I mean by that? Well, Jupiter is opinions and ideas, and it's truth and justice, and Jupiter is very self-righteous. It can even be bombastic, pompous in its righteousness, because Jupiter has opinions that are above the facts, above the law. Jupiter is it's expansive and buoyant and uplifting and spiritually open. And so Jupiter is all these things that have to do with things that we aspire towards. Okay? But Jupiter ultimately comes back to belief. Belief. Neptune and Jupiter kind of work together. They're very similar energies. In fact, Jupiter is inside the orbit of Saturn. So Jupiter can only expand our thoughts, philosophically speaking. Jupiter is philosophy. Jupiter can only expand our thoughts up to the borders of reason. Saturn. Neptune, on the other hand, is outside the orbit of Saturn. And so Neptune is Jupiter once it's been freed from the rules, from the laws, from the boundaries. There's a concept in chemistry, I think it's Boyle's law, that says a gas fills whatever vacuum it has. That same law we all know in computers as it doesn't matter how big your hard drive is, data fills it. It's things expand until they can't expand any further. But with Neptune, they can expand infinitely, which is why Neptune is dreams, it's imagination, it's spirit, it's the infinite ocean. Okay? So Neptune and Jupiter have affinity. In fact, in ancient astrology, Jupiter ruled or was connected to Sagittarius, which is expansive and philosophical and ideas, and Pisces, which is about dreams and imagination and spirit. In modern astrology, we've taken Neptune and given it to Jupiter's old domain of Pisces. So can you see how these two planets are, they have similar energies, if you will. They're both expansive, except Jupiter has to answer, must answer always to the limits of Saturn. Which is why you can have a belief, but if science or experience shows that belief is wrong, then Jupiter changes his belief. On the other hand, Neptune is outside the realm of Saturn's rules or laws. Saturn is science, by the way. I mean, Saturn, historically, it's the laws of nature. So we have this Quincunx, these green lines. This is, I know it's an odd name. It's Latin for 5, quinc, 5 unx, 12, 5/12. It's an aspect that the ancient Greeks said these two planets can't get out of each other's faces, but they can't see each other. Think about this. When two planets are quincunx, let's do a quick exercise, and you'll know exactly what a quincunx is forever. Everyone take their right hand and put it up around their eye level and wiggle the fingers. And make your elbow 90 degrees, wiggle the fingers, and now move it forward and backward until you find that spot where you can see something wiggling, but you can't tell what it is. Got it? All right. Now imagine that there's a steel I-beam connecting your wrist with your ear. And now turn your head to look at it. Turn your head to make it go away. Do you see how it's right in that spot where you can't deal with it? You can't bring it into focus to deal with it, but you can't get rid of it. That's what a quincunx is. Astrologically, most astrologers, if you say, give me a word for quincunx, it would be? Annoying is the second word. Adjustment. Most astrologers, most textbooks will say that the quincunx is an aspect of adjustment. Why? Because you can't get rid of it and you can't bring it into focus. It's like, and annoying is another good word. So what we have here is, and Jupiter's a 12-year cycle. So when Jupiter makes an aspect to an outer planet, especially one that is buzzing its own energy, but from a transpersonal dimension, this is important. And this quincunx between Jupiter, the planet of beliefs and truth, and Neptune, the planet of ain't no truth, it's all illusion, makes for a very interesting statement around this kind of feeding of the idea of what we've now... there was no such concept a year ago as fake news. Now it's in the language. It's a word that is like fake news. It means something. What's fake news? Incidentally, the nodes, which we don't talk about a whole lot here, but are very important in astrology, and I want to talk about them just a bit, because the other significant thing about May is that the nodes are changing signs. Now, the nodes move slowly. It's an 18-year cycle, and as such, the nodes remain in the sign for about a year and a half. And the thing about the nodes is that they move regularly, but backwards. This has to do with the tilt of the Earth and the spinning and the orbit of the Moon around the Earth, and where the orbit of the Moon around the Earth intersects with the orbit of the Earth around the Sun. And when you have a new moon or a full moon that's lined up with a node, that's when you have an eclipse. We're going to have a total eclipse on August 22nd, 21st. That will be visible through Central Oregon and across the United States. This eclipse is being dubbed as the Great American Eclipse because the path begins in Oregon and ends in South Carolina. We'll have a lot more to say about this over the weeks and months, over the months ahead, because I think this eclipse will be very impactful when it comes to the larger political scene. I think that it's going to be huge. But the nodes move backwards, which means that in May, the nodes which have been in Pisces and Virgo, because they're always opposites, for the last year and a half, on May 7th, 8th, I guess this shows here as the 4th, but the first week of May, but this is showing here as the 8th. There's a couple of different ways to calculate the node, but in the first week of May, the nodes move from Pisces back into Aquarius, and this is a bit of a shift. The only reason I'm bringing this up right now, though, is that over the last year, the south node was lined up with Neptune, and I think this was the media black hole of mixing up truth and reality. I think this was the key piece of that whole story that we're now getting a second wave of with the Jupiter quincunx Neptune. Okay, so let's just make sure that we got bases covered here, hit a couple of other dates. We have on May 9th, we have the Sun in Taurus forming a trine with Pluto. This is actually a very sweet, if you call an after party after the prom with Darth Vader very sweet. It's actually potent and powerful, but it's not bad. I know that sounds like I'm talking in almost in negatives, but Pluto is a hard planet even at best. But Pluto is the riches and the magic of what happens in the dark, in the underworld. And so when the sun, the light, harmonizes with Pluto, the dark, which is it? You take a candle into a dark cave, is it light or dark? Light. One candle lights whatever is around. And so when the sun harmonizes or trines to Pluto, and this is exact on May 9th, what happens is that the light of awareness, the illumination of consciousness, is able to go into the dark caverns, caves of the subconscious and make that which was invisible, that which was unconscious, conscious. And you see, this is a basic rule or concept in psychology, and that is when we don't know about something, it can get us. When we know about it, we can work with it. And so the sun's trine to Pluto at the beginning of May, around the same time that Mercury direct is moving over Uranus for the third and final time, stuff comes into awareness, and it's coming from the dark. It's coming out of the closet. It's coming out of the basement. And we're getting to actually see things as it is or as they are. And I think this will be a very, very powerful period of time. And it's leading right into the full moon the following day. And the full moon the following day, let's get this a little bit more exact, is at 20 degrees of Scorpio. The full moon on May 10th. The Scorpio full moon always opposite the Taurus sun. This is called the Buddha full moon because Buddha was born under a Scorpio full moon and died under a Scorpio full moon. This is the tug of war between simplicity, Taurus, sensibility, sensuality, that which I can touch, taste, smell, see, hear, things that are real. Taurus, the Taurus sun, what happens in the spring, this time of year when the sun is in Taurus, and the idea of spring actually turns into things that are real. We see growth, we see twigs on trees that begin to gain substance. The full moon, when the sun is in Taurus, the full moon in Scorpio pits complexity, Scorpio, against simplicity, Taurus. So it is what you see is what you get until you begin to get what you don't see. And then all of a sudden, the bottom drops out. And so that full moon in Scorpio is the awareness, the feeling that it's way more complicated than just Ferdinand chewing on a flower laying in the sun, which is the ultimate Taurus. You know, we have these aberrated views as astrologers, largely because astrology was written by guys, about guys. Let us not forget that most of the tools and techniques we modern astrologers use are named after the monks who figured them out. So we have systems that are called Placidus, Coke is not one. Placidus, Marinus, Porphyry, Regiomontanus, Marinus. These are all names of monks who are living in a boys' club, doing astrology, writing about boys. So why is Taurus? Remember, this is the Taurus time of year until May 20th, when the sun moves into Gemini. Why is Taurus the bull? Taurus is Venus ruled, arguably the most sensual and feminine of the signs. But it's not Taurus the cow. It's Taurus the bull. Now, granted, there is a young energy to spring. Just listen to Ravel's Bolero. where the energy builds. This is the bull, that energy building. But we get kind of sidetracked sometimes by the images that come to us through astrology. Nevertheless, we often think of a bull as an aberrated bull, meaning one that's in a bullfight, a bull that's pissed off, a bull that's angry, a bull that's breathing fire out of its nose and charging after someone. Whereas bulls are really gentle. They only do, is anybody here a Taurus or knows a Taurus, Taurus moon, Taurus rising? Watching a Taurus get angry is like one of the most wonderful and frightening things in the universe. Because there's no way to stop it as it goes into motion. But it's gradual. I mean, they don't, an Aries, someone will say something to you, and an Aries will go, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard of, don't ever say that again. Boom, boom, right off the top. A Taurus, though, will just look and, but if you do the same stupid thing again and again with a Taurus, what happens is that the neck muscles will start to tighten. And then the nostrils will begin to flare. Now, this is all subtle at first, until by the time the person has reached the end of Ravel's Bolero, there's no way to stop the energy from expressing, because that's the determination, the power of the bovine energy in motion. It's the same as a cow coming back to the barn in the evening to be milked. Nothing's going to get in its way. It's that same level of determination. And I should say, having just been in India for 5 weeks, where they have a very different view of cows than we do, that calling a Taurus woman a cow maybe isn't culturally or socially or even personally a right thing to do. You might get slugged. But the fact of the matter is, we live in a culture where we raise cows for meat. However, cows in some cultures are considered to be holy. They're sattvic. They give of themselves without deplenishing their energy. And the same was true of other religions that began in the age of Taurus, not only Hinduism, but in Egypt, the idea of worshiping Venus through the cow, the golden calf, was a symbol of fertility and beauty and richness rather than a hamburger. So we have the full moon. So we have the full moon in Scorpio opposite the sun in Taurus, which is an incredibly potent full moon, and we get another level of goody out of this. And that is, this full moon is harmonized or sextile with Pluto, which is trine the sun and sextile the moon. And so this is the ability to go deep, to go into the darkness, to recover the energy, and to do something with it. This is a very powerful full moon. During this full moon, incidentally, we also have that Jupiter quincunxing Neptune, which I talked about, but Mars is in the picture. Mars in Gemini, tap dancing its way through Gemini, and Mars is basically kind of getting along better with Jupiter than with Neptune. Mars is trine Jupiter, so Mars is basically physically moving in and out of places, getting information, data, to support Jupiter's idea of truth. But at the same time, that Mars is 90 degrees to Neptune, basically saying an illusion is an illusion. So I think this full moon, the middle of May or May 10th, is going to be very important for a number of reasons. Now, as we move on, we get that Mars actually hits the exact trine to Jupiter just a couple of days later on the 12th. That Mars, we're still going here an hour at a time. There we go. That Mars is trine Jupiter on the 12th. And then on the 15th, Mercury moves into Taurus. And now we're getting a bit more grounded in how we think. Mercury in Aries was fast, even though it was retrograde for a while in Aries. Mercury in Aries is fast. It just keeps going. It's moving. In Taurus, there's a sense of we might see some real kind of breakthroughs on getting to real information that we might deem important. That's Mercury moving into Taurus. However, on the 16th, we have the Sun now forming a quincunx with Saturn, and this is a bit annoying. We're back to that aspect of adjustment. The Sun in Taurus that make it real, the simplistic thing that makes sense, and Saturn is basically saying this is not matching up with what's right. There's something here about individual needs that are conflicting with the real, the flag at the top of the mountain, the ideal, the goals. May 18th, we mentioned this. We're just cleaning up here, coming through. That is the trine of Saturn to Uranus. Incidentally, there's a very sweet day here on the 17th, and I only know this because I wrote dailies on this a few days ago, and that is the moon in Aquarius forming a grand air trine with Mars and Jupiter. And so May 17th is a very cool day. It's my brother's birthday. It actually would have been Jeff's birthday, too, on the 16th and 17th. But this is a very powerful day to take ideas, thoughts, air is mental, and to do something with it, to put them into action. Very powerful day. By the 19th, we have the Mars now forming a quincunx with Pluto. This is a bit less friendly, a bit of a power struggle. The brilliant ideas that we had a day or two ago kind of may run into some obstacles that we have to deal with. By the time we get to the 19th, we have Venus exactly opposite Jupiter on the 19th. We'll be feeling this the 17th, 18th, 19th. This is about indulgence. This is sweetness. This is overdoing. And yet it's good as long as we don't take it too far. That's Venus opposing Jupiter on the 19th. On the 20th, the Sun moves into Gemini. We'll talk more about Gemini energy in general next month. But what that means is the Sun moves into Gemini. We have Mars in Gemini. There's a sense of being lighter on our feet. In Taurus, we're determined. We're plodding. Except with the Scorpio moon, then we're plotting too. But we're plodding along in through Taurus. But by the end of the month, or by the 21st, when the Sun moves into Gemini, with Mars already in Gemini, we're hot to trot. We're moving. The energy is picking up quite a bit. On the 25th, we get a square from Venus to Pluto. And this square on the 25th, we'll be feeling that the 22nd, 3rd, 4th. But by the 25th, when Venus is exactly squared to Pluto, this is a bit tougher. Remember we talked earlier about Venus square to Saturn. Venus warm and nice and sweet and romantic, and Saturn, no, you can't, or withholding or creating boundaries. Well, with Pluto, it's intense and it's passionate and it's powerful, but stuff's coming up. This can be about suspicion, jealousy, power struggle. But it's not so much power struggle in what you do, it's who's controlling your feelings, or whose feelings are you trying to control. There's the sense of that struggle between what's sweet and nice and what's down and dark and dirty and deep. And I don't know if anybody here or if everybody here knows the story of Persephone, but this is a bit of the Venus-Pluto square, because Pluto, as the lord of darkness, the lord of the underworld, abducts Persephone, who's like a young Venus, training to be queen, but she's a virginal young princess, queen in training, and she's waiting for Prince Charming to come, and along comes Pluto, and so much for that story. And there's a whole fascinating, in-depth story around this that I don't want to get distracted and go too deeply into. Other than when you have Venus and Pluto working together, Venus goes from innocence to experience. And it's not necessarily bad, because she becomes queen of the underworld. in Persephone. She gains an incredible amount of power, and much to Mom's displeasure, she also gains unearthly pleasure. Let's just leave it at that. Look, she's got. I mean, in no way am I making Pluto's abduction of Persephone to be okay. Anyone's overstepping anyone's boundaries ever. However, Mom, Ceres, the goddess of the fruit of the grain of the earth, is not happy about this. And yet Venus goes back to be queen of the underworld for 6 months a year, forever, because she's getting something out of the deal. Look, she gets the ultimate bad boy. You know, she's waiting for Prince Charming to come along, and up comes the black limousine with black leather on the inside with the baddest of all bad boys, the Lord of the Hell Realms. I mean, you know. So on May 25th, Venus squares Pluto, and this is not an easy energy, but it's one that if we have the courage to go there, we can actually do tremendous work in bringing stuff up to the surface. Now, we're also here coming right into the new moon, and the new moon is on, where'd it go? We have a new moon here exactly somewhere. I know it's there. We'll just do it this way. Hours. Whoop. So we have the new moon on May 25th. Why doesn't this show up here? Moon. I give up. It's my sheet that's... Anyhow, so we have the new moon in Gemini on May 25th. And this is a very interesting new moon for kind of an odd reason. And that is when we look at the strength or the weakness or the difficulty or the ease of integrating the energy of a new moon or full moon, the first thing we look at is what aspects is the new moon making to all the other planets? And we look here, and the answer is virtually none. Now, there's a very wide trine to Jupiter. It's almost 9 degrees. There's a wide square to Neptune, also 10 degrees. But largely, that moon is like the cheese in The Farmer in the Dell. Isn't it? The cheese stands alone. Did I mess up my nursery rhymes? Did I do okay? The cheese stands alone. We have all this other stuff going on, and some of it is very powerful. I mean, we do have Venus still squaring Pluto. This is powerful stuff. We have Uranus, Saturn trining Uranus. This is incredibly intense and powerful. And yet this new moon in Gemini, which is basically light and easy and breezy and kites flying, you know, in the spring breeze, and it's warm and it's nice and it's like, but it's not connected with anything else. And what do we do with that? And I think this becomes the dilemma of the end of May on into June, is how do we take the ideas that we have that are making sense and that are going somewhere and that are actually, that feel right and feel good. There's a sense of lightheartedness even, but it flies in the face of the heavier energies that are everywhere around us. And I think that's the dilemma of this particular new moon. Now, one other thing that we have that I think we will feel, and it's part of this new moon, but it will build over the next couple of days, and that is Mars, also in Gemini. So we have the new moon, the sun and the moon lined up in Gemini. We have Mars also in Gemini, and by the 28th, well, let's take this back off hours, and by the 28th, that Mars in Gemini, there we go. Mars in Gemini by the 28th is exactly opposite Saturn in Sagittarius. And this makes a tough the end of May is kind of a hairy few days. It gets tough, and the end of the month there's a lot going on. But I think that this opposition from Mars to Saturn really speaks a lot of what we're dealing with. Mars in Gemini is not as effectual as Mars can be in other signs, because Mars is the god of war and Gemini is basically talking about it. This is someone who can talk a good war. I don't want to go there either. This is, Mars in Gemini is the ability to do verbal battle. Mars in Gemini is the cleverness, it's the repartee, it's the smartass who basically can come back with all the right answers. But Mars here is arguing with Saturn. And Saturn looks at Mars. There's a scene in, I think, the first Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indiana Jones is going to get on the airplane, and there's this guy with these knives, and he's spinning these knives, and he's between Indiana Jones and the airplane, and he's like a force to be reckoned with. And he's doing his thing, and he looks like he's mean, and he could kill Indiana Jones and 10 other people. And Indiana Jones watch him, and the tension's building, and he takes out a gun, and in one bullet he shoots him. It's done. This is Saturn to Mars in Gemini. Mars in Gemini is like a bee. It's like a mosquito that Saturn basically looks at and goes, done. So what does this mean? Mars is hot. Saturn is cold. Mars is the gas pedal of our lives. Saturn is the brakes. Mars says yes, Saturn says no. Mars says do it, Saturn says don't do it. Mars says, okay, I won't do it. Saturn says, you better do it. It's like we can't get it right. It's frustration. And it's hard to find a balance point between yes and no, between go and no go. And I think that's kind of where May ends up. It's not an easy or even a very pretty point, but it's like in Olympic competitions, when you're doing a dive, you may do a swan dive absolutely perfectly, and you get 5s all the way, or 8s, or whatever the numbers are, all the way across. But then there's another rating, level of difficulty, and there it's like, difficulty 1. The next person comes along and does a backward 2.5 twist, double backward, whatever, and that person might only get a 3.5 out of 5 in execution, but they get a 10 in level of difficulty. So here, Mars and Saturn in ancient astrology are called the malefics. They're not bad planets. They're just more difficult to work with. And when they're in opposition with one and another, the energy can be tough to work with. However, when one practices to do that dive, one gets extra points from the cosmos for level of difficulty. And here is how this month ends. And that is, if you do the work, you get the reward. And you can't cram for a Saturn exam on the night before. You can't stay up all night and kind of go back and retroactively register that you were a Russian agent 3 years ago. It doesn't work that way. You have to do it as you go along. And so here we have this idea that even though this aspect doesn't happen until the end of the month, all through the month, now that Mars is already in Gemini, Mars is in Gemini, Gemini is the sign opposite Sagittarius. While Mars is in Gemini, we need to remember, mantra every day, Mars in Gemini will sooner or later need the answer to Saturn in Sagittarius. Mars can't get out of Gemini until it passes that opposition. And that opposition is a bit of a test, and it is exact on May 28th. Now, the good news is that Saturn is not as much of a badass in grading right now as he usually is. Why? Because he's trining Uranus. And in fact, Venus is coming into the picture, and I'm not allowed to talk about it in much detail because it really doesn't happen until the beginning of June. But you can see Venus creeping up here onto Uranus. So Venus is already trining Saturn. That sweetens it. That takes a little bit of the difficulty out. Uranus is harmonizing with Saturn, kind of breaking through those rules. So as Mars is opposing Saturn, the following day Mars forms a sextile with Uranus. And that says that well, maybe there's a little leeway here. And Mars-Uranus is about doing things differently. It's about going out of the box. It's about Mars is getting support from Uranus, which is the revolutionary, which is the radical, the rebel. And so I think the end of the month on the 30th, we have Mars sextile Uranus, and then we end the month on the 31st with Mercury in Taurus harmonizing or trining with Pluto. Remember, we have already had Mars trining with Pluto last month. We had the Sun trining with Pluto in late April, the beginning of May. And now as Mercury moves into that trine with Pluto toward the end of the month, we get to talk about all that shit without being offensive, without freaking ourselves the hell out. We actually get to work. This is like going to the therapist and basically in one session talking about every difficult moment in your life in such a cathartic way, by the time you leave that hour of therapy, you can walk again. And I think it's interesting because the Mars opposed Saturn, it's almost like a rubber band being stretched. It's not easy. And yet, the Mars sextile to Uranus, Venus coming into that in the first days of June, and the Mercury harmonizing or trining Pluto at the end of the month are both, I believe, good news aspects that give us somewhere to go and give us a way to work with the energy. And then, incidentally, the beginning of June, we will have Mars moving into Cancer. We'll begin to move into a whole totally different energy. So, in summary, it ain't as crazy as it was, but it ain't sane. Can you use ain't twice in one sentence? My English teacher in high school would just kill me, fail me automatically. It's not like things are going to become normal. I wanted to say yet, but I think what I need to say is ever again. Do you ever see that poster? And the poster says, "Smile," they said, "things could get worse." So I did, and they did. Well, this is a bit like that. It's like May is, we have some respite in May. We have a little bit of time to assimilate, to integrate, and yet there's also work to be done. And we can't let up, because if we do, by the end of the month, we will certainly be paying the price. Thank you all. See you here next month. And thank you all for coming out on this rainy Seattle night.